Thank you very much for speaking to us, sir. It's a great day talking to you because we're also celebrating 25 years of economic liberalization. It may have not been ushered in by your party, but you've been a key architect of economic liberalization in India in both your stints as finance minister. I must ask you, sir, as somebody who's been a key architect, do you believe India has done enough in the last 25 years?
Well, it's a difficult question to answer because there is always a debate between the pace of reforms. Some people think it's very slow, some people think it is the right pace. My own feeling is that in India, what we have done is consensus has been a difficult thing. So we have built the consensus which is needed for a reform. We have taken one or two steps. We have made sure that we don't have to step back again, take them back, and then we have moved forward. So the hallmark of Indian economic reform process has been, number one, as much consensus as possible. GST is an example.
Sure. Yes.
And second, it's necessarily slow pace because it does not have approval of all sections of the population, of all the political parties in the country. So therefore necessarily it has been slow. But there is no other way in which we could have tackled the reform process except in this way.
Fair point indeed, and I think that's a pragmatic way of also looking at things. Build consensus, but I mean, even if it means move slowly. Manmohan Singh today said, and he was the finance minister when India was in 1991, when India did open up to these reforms. He laments the fact that we reform only in a crisis. Do you believe we've finally gotten out of that mold?
I would not agree with him 100%. It is true that the reforms which were initiated in 1991
were triggered by a crisis.
It were reforms under duress. But, take our period, for instance, 1998 to 2004, the 6 years of the Vajpayee rule. We had different kinds of crises, but reforms were not triggered by that crisis. The conversion of FERA into FEMA was not triggered by a crisis. It was a reform that we chose to proactively to introduce, and therefore it's not always that reforms have been predicated on an economic crisis. They have been very volitional, voluntary also at times.
I will ask you a quick question on reforms and then move away from this. Many people believe that the present government is the first full majority government in economically liberalized India. Governments in the past have been lame duck, there have been coalition governments, but this is a full majority government with a stunning political capital of 282. Do you believe, given the narrative right now on reforms, have they done enough justice to their political capital? Because some people now say that there could have been more path-breaking reforms, at least in the first 2 years, but there has been very creative incrementalism, if I may.
Well, it is a question of choice. And I think as this government and its spokespersons themselves say, they have chosen to move incrementally. A lot of things that they have done in an incremental fashion instead of big bang reforms. And you have to give it, to them. The choice is theirs.
You were called to be a very bold finance minister. If you had a 282 backing you up, would you be more path-breaking or would you be more incremental
Let's not forget that it is only in Lok Sabha. It's not in the Rajya Sabha. And wherever you have to have reforms backed by legislation, it was true in our time also, that you have to depend on alliances, etc., and on the upper house to move the legislation forward.
True.
Now that is a major handicap also in this majority government. It was a major handicap in our time, and my experience would suggest that therefore one has to adopt the attitude of give and take. I'll give you an example. When I introduced the amendment to the insurance laws,
right,
I had suggested 49% foreign direct investment.
They could only settle for 26.
It was the Congress party which insisted on 26. And therefore we had to settle for 26. So that is the kind of give and take that I had in mind when I mentioned this. But you know, let's leave the choice of the pace of reforms and whether they are going to be big bang or they are going to be incremental to the government of the day. It is their call, and they will take the call depending on all the circumstances.
Because we are speaking about reforms, GST is a big game changer, and you know you've spoken about it in the past. You've championed it in some sort of a sense also in the past. My question to you is: do you believe many people are betting their hopes on the monsoon session for this legislation to go through? And like you rightly pointed out, reforms is an act of give and take. You settle somewhere midway and let it go through. Are you as optimistic on the fate of the GST as some stakeholders are beginning to be, or do you believe
Well,
hopes
if
are
the
belied?
government spokespersons are to be believed, then they are hoping that they will be able to get the majority in favor of the GST in the upper house, and I wish them luck. I hope in the monsoon session GST will be adopted, and this is almost the last opportunity.
That's right.
If we want to introduce GST with effect from 1st April next year.
I have a question to ask of you. Do you keep the numbers aside, but can the GST be a reality without the Congress coming on board? And do you believe there also needs to be some amount of walking by the government of the day? The Congress party has put 3 demands. They are well on course with one demand, which is the 1% additional levy to go. The 2 demands that continue to stay, do you believe there has to be give and take there?
Well, there has already been give and take on that 1%. As far as putting the rate in the constitutional amendment, GST rate
That's
in
right,
the
yes.
constitutional amendment is concerned, I am totally against it. You can't amend the constitution, especially through the long
And put a tax rate
procedure,
there.
and put a tax rate there. That should not be accepted by the government. On other issues, they should be open to discussion with the political parties, including the Congress and the various state governments.
So I will move focus and talk about the blitzkrieg in the FDI reforms that one did see. At one level, the narrative is that finally India has given up its paranoia about security concerns, whether it's opening up 100% in defense or 100% in civil aviation. Is that how you read this as well? The whole FDI liberalization that has happened in the last 2 weeks.
I think they are welcome steps, though I'll hasten to add that the reform process, economic reform process in India should not merely be looked at from the point of view of FDI liberalization. There is a lot to economic reforms than merely FDI. But having said that, I'd say that these are welcome steps. When I was finance minister, we had taken courage in both hands and introduced or permitted 40% in defense production, 40% FDI. Now this government has moved forward and it's 100%. To me it appears that 100% foreign direct investment in defense production is much better than spending billions of dollars every year on importing defense supplies.
So have we finally gotten rid of the Swadeshi argument or the security paranoia argument at one level? I mean, we were wary of opening up our telecom sector.
I think the government will be careful as far as the security issues are concerned, because no country would like its security to be compromised with the investment of foreign direct partners up to 100%. But as far as Swadeshi is concerned, I think the Swadeshi angle is fully met in creating self-reliance in the field of defense. I mean, I look at Swadeshi as the strength of India, and I have repeatedly said that the weak and the poor cannot practice Swadeshi. It's only the strong who can practice Swadeshi, because if we are going to people with a begging bowl, what is it that we can talk to them about?
At one level though, do you believe there is a lot of focus, a lot of emphasis, a lot of, if I may say, obsession with reforms for the foreign investors, whether it's FDI, whether it's opening up our markets? Is that a narrative that you would fault this government for?
I would say that it's not merely the government, but ever since the reform process started in this country 25 years ago, there have been elements in India and abroad who have related the reform process directly to
foreign direct markets,
foreign direct investment. I mean, I can tell you from personal experience, insurance sector again. I remember when I went to the US during the elections of 1999, the most important concern of the foreign investor was whether we were going to permit a foreign direct investment in insurance sector, and the entire narrative was concentrated
Just on that.
just on that. We don't have to buy that theory. As I've already told you, foreign direct investment is one part and a small part of the total reform process.
Fair point.
I would say any day that the Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana
Is as important.
is perhaps more important for us as a reform measure than FDI.
There's a reason why I asked you that question, because there are stakeholders in the Indian economy and there are commentators who have said that the whole FDI blitzkrieg actually happened as an effort to neutralize the impact of Raghuram Rajan's exit. It happened a day after. My question to you really is that do you see this as a move as well? How damaging has the decision of the governor been to not seek a second term and go back, and given the narrative and the attacks that he was under?
Well, we are talking, I think, a few weeks before that, after that incident took place.
Yes.
And if you recall the media reports and comments which were being made before the governor made this announcement, you will find that everyone was predicting doom for India.
Were those fears over-exaggerated?
Absolutely. I mean, this country has seen, famous prime ministers pass away, been unseated, and therefore a big country like India cannot be dependent just on one individual.
I'll tell you why there were these comments being made. It was because Raghuram Rajan was under a personal attack by Subramanian Swamy, and I will spend a minute about the motor mouth Swamy is and what he's costing the government, but he was under personal attack, and the government of the day did not really come to his defense, and by his defense I mean to the defense of India's central banker, to the defense of the RBI or the institution that he largely represents, and that caused some amount of concern. Did it concern you?
If I remember right, the finance minister came out quite openly in support of the governor, and at one time the prime minister also spoke about it, and he said that the fact whether he is going to get a second term or not is an administrative matter, and it's best left to those who are going to decide that matter. So this controversy was perhaps entirely unnecessary and was easily avoidable. This gave it a hype which was not called for.
Do you believe the short-term impact of a REXIT, as it was being called globally, and acronyms now describe the events and the world that we live in, but the REXIT, as it was so called, may have not done a short-term damage? The rupee did not fall as it was being predicted, stock markets did not crash, but from a medium to long term, it could perhaps dent at least the image of India in terms of we do not support people who have a view of their own in offices. And the counter argument to that is, do you believe Raghuram Rajan breached his brief?
I'll not answer the second part of your question. It's for Raghuram Rajan to make a judgment. But as I like to repeat what I have said to you earlier, a governor of the Reserve Bank is a governor of the Reserve Bank. He is not the Prime Minister of India. He is not even the Finance Minister of India. He has a role which is well defined in our system, and he has to perform that role. Most governors have performed that role very ably, and there has been no problem. If there has been an issue with Raghuram Rajan, as I said, it was because of the hype which was created, both because of the controversy which was raised about him and also because some of his own statements. The whole thing was entirely avoidable, and then this build-up that if REXIT were to take place as some people described it, then India will collapse, its economy will be ruined. I mean, when I looked at such stories and comments in the media, I was aghast, because this country is much bigger than an individual.
You know, there's a reason why we must spend a little more time talking about the narrative around it, because Subramanian Swamy has not just attacked Raghuram Rajan, and I buy your point that yes, the finance minister and the prime minister made a statement, but they did not come to his defense like they came when Arvind Subramanian or Shaktikanta Das was under attack, and that was perhaps because they had learnt a lesson with Raghuram Rajan. My question is Subramanian Swamy doing a lot of damage to this government?
Uh,
Should he have been brought back into the BJP fold to begin with?
Look, I mean, for me, it's very difficult to answer that question. I would only say that the issue has been settled by whatever the PM has said about this whole issue. We should leave it at that. I'll take the issue as settled.
You'll take the issue as settled, but the man in question is not stopping to tweet. He is putting people under attack, and most people believe he's on war path with the finance minister of this country. For a party and a government that has projected a very unified image of sorts. This is not UPA 2 where there was a lot of infighting, there were camps within the government. Do you believe at that level has this done damage?
You know, I mean, this country, again, I'll say, is too big a country, and such things are of a very transitory nature, and we move on. So let's leave that behind us and move on.
Let's move on and talk about the imminent cabinet reshuffle in the works for a while, and we're given to understand one will finally happen. Do you believe what the government needs today, and I'm going to go back to the Vajpayee government, the kind of people who worked in that government, the intensity of the capital, whether it was, you know, people like yourself or people other than ministers, other than yourself, there was a lot of experience that ministers had. There was a lot of capacity that they brought to the table. A lot of people worry about the talent deficit in this government. Do you believe the Modi Sarkar can perhaps do with some amount of technocrats, some lateral inductions, or do you believe this is going to be one face powder reshuffle? We'll get some people from UP to come in and that is about it?
No, you know, in our system, it's entirely the prerogative of the Prime Minister, and let's trust him with the best possible judgment. I'm sure he's aware of the kind of comments that you have made. And, you know, I like to make only one point here. There are very experienced people in this government. And there are people who have been members or ministers of the Vajpayee government also.
That's right.
The more important thing for any government is not so much who is in what position. The more important thing is institutional memory. Is the government being benefited from that kind of institutional memory? Are people in government, in civil service, elsewhere available to the government who will be able to tell the government what had happened in a similar situation in the past?
But do you
and
believe...
I am not merely referring to the Vajpayee government.
Absolutely, yes.
I am referring to all governments in the past. And that institutional memory should be provided by the system.
But do you believe the system is encouraging that institutional memory to be tapped right now?
It should.
Dialogue is not a very favorite mode of communication.
No, it's not a question of dialogue also. It's a question of those who are responsible for advising the government, giving the right advice based on it, at least pointing out that, look, in a similar situation, in 1995, we did this. In a similar situation, in 2005, we did this. In a similar situation, this was the response of India. And if that kind of institutional memory is available to the government, then it will help take the right decision.
Fair point, sir. I also want to move to India's foreign policy, and there are two specific issues that I obviously want to touch upon. I first want to talk to you about the NSG issue. As somebody who's been a part of policy making and specifically, you know, health portfolios there, what do you make of how we approach the NSG issue? Do you believe it was a diplomatic error of sorts? We were going after China, blaming China alone, but the opposition came from other members as well, and some of the members where the prime ministers did go visiting.
You know, institutional memory becomes important. In 2008, we were able to get a clean waiver for ourselves,
yes,
which gave us all the benefits which NSG membership would make available to us. Now, what were the factors which enabled that clean waiver? A phone call from President Bush to the Chinese leadership, for instance. There was no phone call this time, you know. So we had to make an assessment before we gave it such hype, whether how strong was the Chinese opposition, how strong was the US support for us, and then in the light of that, and also the reservation of some other countries, we should have decided whether we'll give it this kind of hype or not. I am not against India making an application, but we should have maybe not pressed it in the manner in which we did. And, you know, the last minute appeal of our Prime Minister to the Chinese President in Tashkent, all this could have been avoided if we had taken a decision well in advance that we'll not play it beyond a point, we'll not press it beyond a point, and if it comes our way, fine. If it does not, then you know, it doesn't hurt us.
Where did you think we erred? Did we err on the fact that we did not have enough right support from the US and other members who did finally object, or were we too obsessed with chasing China?
No, we had to chase China because China was the main opposition. There is no doubt about it. Other people might have raised issues of procedure.
Right.
But I think the most critical mistake which was made was that we ourselves hyphenated India with Pakistan. When the External Affairs Minister of India said in her press conference openly that we don't mind Pakistan becoming a member of NSG, I think that was entirely avoidable, and we should not have brought ourselves at par with Pakistan. Our record in nuclear field is much superior to Pakistan. Pakistan is a rogue state even in nuclear technology.
Because you're talking about Pakistan, and of course that's a subject again very close to your heart and something that you've been very candid over with your views on, there has been so much of outreach, you know, at a personal level as well, from the Prime Minister making that impromptu visit and all of that, and yet what Pakistan comes back is with a very treacherous record of sorts. The Prime Minister in his interview with Arnab on Times Now did say that one doesn't know who does one speak to in the Pakistani government. Should we be speaking to the elected representatives? Should we be speaking to the army? Is that a dilemma that policymakers in India have always been caught with? And,
no,
what is the way out?
One thing which has always been clear is that whoever is the elected or unelected government in office, it is always the army which has been calling the shots as far as relationship with India is concerned. You know, and that's a reality, that's a given, and we have to be conscious. Now, when we talk to the elected government, and we have to talk only to the elected government, or any government which is in power in Pakistan, we have to keep in mind the fact how much clout that government has with the army. And if that government does not have enjoy a clout with the army, then talking to that government becomes that much less profitable or fruitful. And then we should decide to what extent we shall engage with Pakistan, depending on our own assessment of the situation in Pakistan. And you know, there are two very strong opinions in India. Some people believe we must continuously talk to Pakistan, irrespective of the results. And the second is that terror and talks, which has been our line, cannot go together. And I am a very strong advocate, because this was the line of Mr. Vajpayee, that terror and talks cannot go together. And as long as Pakistan is sponsoring terror activities in India and exporting cross-border terrorism, there is no point in talking to Pakistan.
But then how do you de-escalate the tension that still exists?
By protecting ourselves. Why do we have to de-escalate the tension with Pakistan? Because Pakistan is at war with India. Whether we realize it, recognize it, or we do not recognize it, the manner in which now the terrorists are attacking our security forces and our security establishments, it's clear that Pakistan is at war with India. So what do you do when you are at war? You protect yourself. That's the first thing. And that's why I feel that India perhaps has not done enough in all these years to protect itself.
Isn't the cost of protection too high?
No, whatever the cost of protection, it has to be paid by this country. We cannot allow our people to be killed, our Jawans to be killed by Pakistani terrorists.
I'm going to go back to Raghuram Rajan and his tenure. Many people thought during his tenure in the RBI over the last 3 years, he was an inflation warrior. Now, we can be on both sides of the argument, but he did target, first time inflation targeting happened in India. He went after the bank NPAs. Do you believe his exit, makes both those arguments a little redundant today? And that's the fear that the market has. And B, at a stage when there are chances of a loose monetary policy, and I know you've been a big votary of a little bit of fiscal flexibility and having an FRBM range, is that really warranted right now? Chances of a loose monetary policy and perhaps fiscal flexibility as well?
No, I'm not in favor. I've never been in favor of a loose monetary policy. And I personally feel that inflation targeting is a good objective. But what kind of inflation? You can't target food inflation.
That's right. Yes.
You should not target food inflation. You should target the wholesale price index. And if the wholesale price index is in the negative territory and food inflation is 5%, 6% or even more, then what are you going to achieve through monetary tightening? There are only two things you can do in monetary policy. One is raise interest rates.
Or cut interest rates.
No, or go for liquidity squeeze.
That's right, yes.
Both hurt. They don't hurt the person who is buying food. They hurt those who want to make investment. And therefore, there has to be a right balance struck between the need of controlling inflation and the state of monetary policy.
So are you saying inflation targeting is a good thing, but targeting CPI is perhaps erroneous, go after WPI?
No, you can't put all your eggs in the CPI basket and say because CPI is 5% or 6%, therefore I'll continue to target it, while inflation, WPI is in the negative territory. That's where I had a difference of opinion with Raghuram Rajan. I felt that he was being perhaps a little too strict. There was need for further loosening of interest rates in a situation where the wholesale price index was under control.
I have a last question to ask of you, sir. And as a finance minister, you've faced this dilemma and you've looked at the rain gods for them to rain many times over. Too much has been talked about the monsoon. I mean, Indian markets are also perked up despite the Brexit and all of that, because they believe monsoons are going to be good, demand is going to come back, consumption is going to be revived. Are we betting too much on the rain gods?
What is happening is what is happening in this country, unfortunately, is everything is hyped.
So now monsoon is a big hype as well.
So my monsoon for the time being will be a big hype. I have seen reports that in June it's been deficient.
Yes.
July is supposed to make up for it. Let's see. I mean, we are a monsoon dependent country. Our agriculture is.
Right.
But all this hype perhaps is not necessary. I can't think of any year where there has not been some deficiency of the monsoon in some part of the country or the other.
Fair point indeed. And that's a pragmatic solution and a pragmatic opinion that's coming in from a policymaker who's still himself a good. Thank you very much for speaking to us, sir. It's a pleasure talking to you.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.